We are delighted to have one of the book's contributors, Joan Didion, of the class of '56, here to read her essay. Miss Didion, novelist, screenwriter, and social essayist, is among America's greatest living writers and was alumna of the year in 1981. Her essay from There Was Light recalls her days in Berkeley, and it is my pleasure to present Joan Didion.
Berkeley is so much a part of who I am that I find it almost impossible to reflect rationally on what it meant to me, what I got out of it, what it did for me. All I know is that I arrived here at 18 with 2 new Samsonite suitcases, a portable Olivetti, an inchoate yearning to be somebody better than I was, and not the slightest business being here. I wasn't prepared, I was ignorant. I knew nothing. I was ignorant even of that. I had done nothing in high school but resist it, cutting every class I could and daydreaming through the rest, staying up all night to read novels not on the reading list. When I got to Berkeley and noticed people writing during lectures, I could conclude only that they were writing letters home. When I finally caught on to the mechanics of taking notes, I still failed to get the point and diligently filled notebooks with the peripheral, words caught on the fly, stray phrasings I thought felicitous. I had no idea how to organize the day, prepare for a midterm, write a paper. I had a certain spurious facility with language, but no idea how to think through what I wanted to say. The arresting first line was by default my strong point. Never mind where it led. I had no idea really of even why I was here or what was expected of me or what in a more specific vein than be better it was I wanted to do. Yet I loved it right away. I loved walking up from the campus in the late afternoon and watching the fog blow in. I loved walking down past LSB and seeing the bay come into view. I loved passing those places on the campus where the creek can be heard but not seen. I loved spending time in bookstores, touching the smooth covers of new books, imagining that if I owned them, I would magically absorb them, know it all. I loved sitting on the balcony in the Morrison Library, listening to recordings of poets reading their own poetry, and imagining that I lived in the burnished light of all that splendor. All the while knowing that I belonged downstairs in the fluorescent light in the reserved book room, waiting for one or another crucial 3-hour hold that I had not yet even gotten around to putting on call. I loved wasting time in coffee shops, loved talking and reading and knowing, once again as always, that I was on a temporary pass from the prison of the reserved book room. I loved certain classes, loved being forced or shown how to make connections I had not before known how to make. Connections between literature and language. Connections between language and politics. Quote, when the American soldiers tore down the gates at Buchenwald, what they found was a poem by Baudelaire, unquote. I have no memory of who said this or in what class it was said, but I remember hearing it said and being astonished and walking up the campus oblivious to everything that was being said around me, trying to grapple for once with the implications of what was for me an entirely new but immediately logical causal relationship between ideas and history. I love most of all that very aspect of the Berkeley experience that came into such strenuous question a decade later in the early 60s. I love the anonymity of being here. I love being left alone. Love the absolute absence of the kind of enforced community I had disliked, found false and sentimental and at base authoritarian in other institutions I knew about, like high school. I love the freedom, which of course included the freedom to fail, slip under, go down and out, in what was still, after all, a relatively benign situation. There were a lot of ways you could fail at Berkeley, and a lot of ways you could make a recovery. And in either case, nobody would much care. Failing academically was the least of it. You could stop getting up in the morning. You could let your shoes run down at the heel. You could have a failure of the will or of the imagination. We all saw it happen to somebody we knew. This constant possibility of failure, of dropping below the line unnoticed and unremarked upon, introduced an element of dread to daily life at Berkeley, a chill in the late afternoon, even more pronounced than the chill endemic to all campuses at that time of day. I remember dirty coffee cups, scraps of muddied paper overflowing trash baskets. I remember the dispiriting prospect of the evening ahead promising nothing but the inevitable 6 o'clock dinner. Yet this dread was its own challenge and could provide its own exhilaration, risky. The freedom to fail was also the freedom to be, to make one's own way, to choose the road not just less traveled by, but less traveled by for good reason. Because it was mine, say, or led nowhere. There was, of course, a downside to this free market aspect of the Berkeley experience. It was entirely possible to graduate with an eccentric or incomplete education. Everything I know to this day about European history was learned indirectly and in a real sense accidentally, picked up from novels or poetry. On a campus where there were at that time 7 or 8 Nobel laureates in the sciences, I learned no science at all. Managing to fulfill my science requirement with a geology lecture favored by football players. At 21, still unprepared, still ignorant, even more aware of my own limitations than I had been at 18, I left Berkeley to go to work in New York. I did not graduate with honors. I barely graduated at all. I had somehow managed to overlook a required course in Milton, and only through the vast tolerance and generosity of the English department was one provided. An intensive seminar on the cosmology of Paradise Lost for one student, me. I think of this seminar whenever I hear complaints about how big Berkeley is, how impersonal. My diploma was mailed to me, and when it arrived in New York, I put it in a box and had no occasion to look at it again until some years later when I was living in Los Angeles and needed to show I needed to show a diploma in order to get a stack permit at UCLA. Berkeley seemed to me then an experience I had left incomplete, an open question, and in some sense an accusation. I had 19 years later an extraordinary opportunity. I had a second chance at Berkeley. In the spring of 1975, I was asked to come back to the English department as a Regents lecturer. A reversal of positions that moved me profoundly. An opportunity or so, I thought, to close the circle, answer the open question. In some ways, nothing at all had changed. I still avoided Milton. I still disliked Spencer. I still could not read the Faerie Queene. I still procrastinated. I still spent more time in bookstores than at my desk. I still dreaded the fall of 4 o'clock. I had a room at the faculty club, and I still felt myself an undergraduate, a secret agent, an imposter who had somehow managed to infiltrate the citadel of grown-up life. The single class I was teaching met in Wheeler Hall, and my stride still adjusted automatically to the familiar way the steps flatten out on the uphill side. I was still unsettled by the familiar questions. What was I doing with what I had been given? What was I making of what I had learned? Aside from maybe 1,000 fragments of poetry, what in fact had I learned? Why had I not learned Russian, Chinese, the colonial history of Africa, physics, the kings of France? What Berkeley had offered me was for all practical purposes infinite. Why had my ability to accept it been so finite? Why did I still have so many questions? Why did I still have so few answers? Would I not be a more finished person had I been provided a chart, a design for living? I think so. I also think that the world I know, given such a chart, would have been narrowed, constricted, diminished, a more ordered and less risky world, but not the world I wanted, not free, not Berkeley, not me.